Hello there, and welcome. Tonight we're going to explore the powerful, mysterious, and sometimes frightening world of natural disasters. Earthquakes, storms, volcanoes, and floods. These mighty forces have been changing the surface of our planet for millions of years. They are fierce, wild, and often dangerous. But when we look at them from a safe place, they become something else completely. They become amazing reminders of how alive and active our Earth truly is. Every disaster has its own story to tell. An earthquake can make the ground move in waves, just like the ocean. A volcano can fill the skies with colours we never see in normal sunsets. Storms can bring winds so strong they bend entire landscapes, and tsunamis can carry the energy of a single wave across whole oceans. These events are not just about destruction. They are also creators. They carve valleys, build mountains, and even give birth to brand new islands rising from the sea. As you listen tonight, you do not need to remember every detail. You do not need to stay awake for every word. Let the facts wash over you like gentle waves. Let them carry you towards sleep. Imagine yourself floating above the earth, watching storms swirl and mountains grow. Imagine the deep rumble of the planet beneath you, steady and strong. You are safe here. You are warm. You are simply drifting through stories of fire and water, wind and stone. The world outside your window will keep turning. The tides will rise and fall, the wind will blow, the rain will come and go. And you, right now, can simply rest. So take a deep breath. Let your shoulders drop. Let your thoughts slow down. We are about to drift through 100 quiet truths about the forces that shape our world. Let the journey begin. Fact 1. Earthquakes can make rivers flow backward. Most of the time, rivers follow gravity, moving downhill toward the ocean. But when a very powerful earthquake strikes, it can actually reverse the flow of a river. During the Great Earthquake that shook Alaska in the 1960s, entire sections of rivers suddenly rushed upstream for several minutes. The ground moved so violently that it tilted the riverbeds themselves, sending water flowing in the opposite direction. People who watched it happen saw waves running backward against the current, as if time itself had briefly turned around. The same thing has been recorded in the Mississippi River, where earthquakes centuries ago pushed the water to flow north instead of south. These moments do not last long, but they remind us that Earth itself is not fixed or still. It is flexible, restless, and alive. It is strong enough to bend the natural order we usually take for granted. Fact 2. The largest earthquake ever measured actually shifted the entire axis of our planet. In May of 1960, the largest earthquake ever recorded struck the country of Chile. Scientists remember it as the Great Chilean Earthquake, and it reached a magnitude of around 9.5 on the Richter scale. This made it the most powerful quake in all of human history. The shaking was so intense and so widespread that it did more than just collapse buildings and create tsunamis. It actually changed the planet itself. Scientists who studied the event discovered that the way Earth's mass was redistributed caused the axis of the planet to shift by several inches. The axis is the invisible line around which the Earth spins. Even more amazing, the quake shortened the length of each day by tiny fractions of a second, because the rotation of the planet had subtly changed. This reminds us that natural disasters are not only local events. At their most extreme, they can ripple outward until they touch the very balance of our spinning world. Fact 3. Some earthquakes make the ground roll like waves on the ocean. We often think of earthquakes as sudden jolts, a violent shaking that rattles windows and knocks things over. But some of the strongest quakes are much stranger and more surreal. Instead of a quick shake, they make the earth move in slow, rolling waves. During large earthquakes, especially those that stretch along faults for hundreds of miles, the ground can actually behave like liquid. Roads start to ripple as if they were made of cloth instead of concrete. Buildings rise and fall in rhythm with invisible swells moving through the earth. People standing in open fields have described feeling seasick as the land beneath their feet heaves up and down. This is not imagination or exaggeration. It is the energy of seismic waves travelling through solid rock, bending and flexing it just like water in the ocean. For a few unforgettable moments, the Earth stops feeling like solid ground and starts feeling more like an ocean in motion. It reminds us that beneath our feet, the crust of the planet is flexible, responsive, and full of hidden movement that we never see in normal times. Fact 4. Lightning can strike the same place hundreds of times during a single storm. There is an old saying that lightning never strikes the same place twice, but nature does not follow our sayings or our expectations. In reality, lightning very often strikes the same location over and over again, especially if that place sticks up above everything around it. The Empire State Building in New York City, for example, gets struck by lightning dozens of times every single year. In some particularly intense storms, a single tower, mountain peak, or radio antenna might get struck hundreds of times in a row as the storm clouds above keep releasing their energy into the tallest and most conductive object they can find. One of the most extraordinary natural displays of this happens at a place called Catatumbo Lightning in Venezuela, where storms gather at the mouth of a river and unleash lightning strikes night after night, sometimes for hours without stopping. Far from being random, lightning is actually drawn to certain paths in the sky, carving a glowing fingerprint of energy across the same patch of atmosphere again and again throughout the storm. Fact 5. Volcanic eruptions can create their own weather systems right above the crater. When a volcano erupts with immense force, it does much more than just pour out lava and ash. The combination of ash, extreme heat, and gases thrown into the sky can disturb the atmosphere so deeply that they actually create entire weather systems directly above the eruption. Massive columns of ash rise tens of thousands of feet into the air, and when they reach certain heights, moisture in the atmosphere begins to condense into storm clouds. Inside these churning towers of ash and vapour, winds start to swirl, raindrops begin to form, and lightning flashes in wild, chaotic bursts. Scientists have recorded volcanic plumes that generate full thunderstorms raging directly above the volcano's crater. In some cases, these volcanic storms even develop their own miniature tornadoes that spin out of the billowing ash clouds. It is as if the Earth itself is creating a storm within a storm, a violent fusion of fire and air happening all at once. These volcanic weather systems do not last very long, but they show us the raw connection between the surface of the Earth and the skies above it, where fire can actually call down thunder and ash can summon bolts of lightning from the clouds. Fact 6. There are storms on Earth that spin faster than a jet engine. The most powerful storms on our planet are not just massive in size, they are also unimaginably fast in their rotation. In certain supercells, which are enormous thunderclouds that give birth to the strongest tornadoes, winds can spin at speeds faster than the spinning blades of a jet engine. Some tornadoes have been measured with wind speeds well over 200 miles per hour, strong enough to tear houses completely off their foundations and fling heavy vehicles into the air as if they were toys. The amount of energy contained in such storms is beyond anything humans can easily imagine or create. Scientists who chase these storms and study them describe watching funnels twist with such incredible speed that their edges become blurred, like watching a colossal drill spinning at maximum power. At their most extreme, the rotation becomes so rapid that the air pressure inside the funnel drops dramatically and the surrounding atmosphere rushes inward with explosive force. To witness such a storm up close is to see the atmosphere itself completely unleashed, spinning with the furious mechanical precision of nature's own engine, more powerful than any machine we have ever built. Fact 7. Tsunamis can travel across entire oceans without losing much of their power. Most waves that we see on the beach fade and weaken as they spread out across the water, their energy dissipating with distance. But tsunamis are fundamentally different from normal waves. Born from massive shifts in the seafloor caused by earthquakes, landslides, or volcanic eruptions, they are not just surface waves rippling along the top of the water. Instead, they are waves of the entire ocean itself, carrying energy through the full depth of the water from the surface all the way down to the seafloor. Because of this unique property, they can cross entire oceans with only a very slight loss of strength. After the Great Earthquake off the coast of Japan in 2011, enormous waves raced across the entire Pacific Ocean, striking distant shores many hours later with devastating force. In the 1800s, a tsunami triggered by a volcanic eruption in Indonesia travelled more than halfway around the globe, and its waves were still strong enough to be clearly measured on the far side of the world. Tsunamis are a powerful reminder that the ocean is connected everywhere, and that one violent pulse in its depths can be felt by continents an ocean away. Fact 8. Some tornadoes have actually tossed entire trains off their tracks. We usually think of tornadoes as being capable of damaging houses or uprooting trees, but some of the most powerful twisters in history have been strong enough to hurl objects that we normally imagine as completely immovable. In the American Midwest, eyewitnesses and historical records describe tornadoes that lifted entire freight trains, with dozens of connected cars made of steel, and threw them completely off their tracks. Locomotives weighing hundreds of tons have been shifted and overturned by winds compressed into a narrow, violent funnel. The mechanics behind this are brutal, yet fascinating to scientists. The winds do not simply push the train from one side. Instead, they create an extremely low pressure vortex that can actually lift enormously heavy objects upward, functioning much like a gigantic vacuum cleaner. Photographs taken after such storms show twisted railroad tracks and scattered train cars lying in farm fields like discarded toys left behind by a giant child. These accounts give us important perspective on the raw physics and power of tornadoes, with rotating winds so strong that they can literally tear even the heaviest machines of human industry right off the surface of the Earth. Fact 9. Earthquakes can trigger volcanoes that are thousands of miles away. The crust of the Earth is like a vast web of plates, fractures, and stress lines, all interconnected in ways that scientists are only beginning to fully understand. When a massive earthquake strikes somewhere on the planet, it does not only rattle the land near its center point called the epicenter. Instead, seismic waves from that earthquake travel outward in all directions, pulsing deep through the interior of the planet. In some rare but documented cases, these powerful waves have reached dormant volcanoes sitting thousands of miles away and actually stirred them back to life. After enormous earthquakes struck in Alaska and Chile, scientists noticed a sudden and unexpected increase in volcanic activity in regions that were thousands of miles away from where the original earthquake happened. The vibrations from the earthquake had loosened magma chambers deep underground, disturbed the delicate balances of gas pressure and liquid rock, and in some cases even triggered full eruptions. It is almost as if the planet itself shudders in sympathy when one part of it experiences trauma, with one violent event rippling into another across vast distances. These surprising connections remind us that Earth is not just a collection of isolated mountains, oceans, and valleys, but rather a single living system where one disaster in one location may whisper to another, feature far away, potentially sparking a dangerous chain reaction that spreads across the entire globe. Fact 10. Hurricanes release more energy in a single day than all the nuclear weapons in the world combined. A hurricane might look like just a beautiful swirl of white clouds when viewed from space, but hidden inside that swirl is energy on an absolutely staggering scale that is hard for the human mind to comprehend. As warm ocean water evaporates and rises into the atmosphere, it fuels a massive engine of condensation and wind. The amount of heat energy released by a single average hurricane in just one day can actually rival the power of the entire global arsenal of nuclear weapons, all detonating at the same exact time. Scientists have calculated that the total power output of an average hurricane equals hundreds of trillions of watts, which is far more than all the electricity that humans produce worldwide in that same period. The winds themselves, as destructive as they are, represent only a small part of the total energy. The real power lies in something called the latent heat of water vapor condensing into rain droplets. In effect, hurricanes are absolutely colossal machines powered directly by the ocean itself, constantly converting heat into motion and destruction, on a scale that dwarfs almost anything else in nature. When we look at their beautiful spirals on satellite images, we are actually seeing not just weather patterns, but one of the most powerful engines that nature can unleash upon our world. Fact 11. A single bolt of lightning can heat the air around it to temperatures hotter than the surface of the sun. When lightning flashes across the sky, the brilliance happens so suddenly and is so intensely bright that it seems almost impossible to understand what is actually taking place in that split second. A single lightning bolt is essentially a channel of electricity racing between a cloud and the ground below, or sometimes between two different clouds, and it discharges with truly unimaginable force. Inside that narrow channel of electricity, the temperature suddenly surges to over 50,000 degrees Fahrenheit, which is actually many times hotter than the surface of our own sun. This incredible heat instantly superheats all the air molecules around the lightning bolt, causing the air to expand outward in an extremely violent shockwave. That shockwave is what we hear rolling across the landscape as thunder, like the crack of a cosmic whip echoing through the sky. For just a brief moment, lasting only a fraction of a second, the air in that channel becomes a raging furnace hot enough to instantly melt sand into glass, sometimes leaving behind strange branching structures buried in the ground called fulgurites, which are fossilized lightning. To witness a lightning strike is to see pure electricity from nature unleashed in its rawest form, transforming the sky into a glowing, thunderous theatre of fire that burns hotter than the very heart of our nearest star. Fact 12. Supervolcanoes have erupted in the past with enough force to change the climate of the entire planet. Most volcanoes that we know about are certainly dangerous, but their effects tend to be fairly localized to the region immediately around them. A supervolcano, however, is something completely and terrifyingly different. These rare giants scattered around the world do not merely spew lava and ash over the slope of a single mountain. Instead, they release enough material in one eruption to literally blanket entire continents with thick layers of ash. One of the most famous examples of a supervolcano lies hidden beneath Yellowstone National Park in the United States. When it last erupted hundreds of thousands of years ago, it threw so much ash and debris into the sky that it fundamentally altered global weather patterns for years afterward. Supervolcano eruptions can dim the sunlight reaching Earth's surface across the entire planet for multiple years at a time, dramatically cooling temperatures worldwide and absolutely devastating agriculture and food supplies. Geological records and studies of ancient rock layers show us that past supervolcano eruptions have even caused mass extinctions of plant and animal species, completely wiping out entire ecosystems in certain regions. The sheer scale of these eruptions is almost beyond human comprehension, with thousands upon thousands of cubic miles of rock, ash and gases being blasted skyward in a single instant. Thankfully, supervolcano eruptions are incredibly rare events, typically separated by hundreds of thousands of years or even longer. But their lingering scars in the geological record serve as sobering reminders of the truly unimaginable power that still lies hidden deep beneath our feet, waiting silently in the depths of the earth. Fact 13. The deadliest cyclone ever recorded in human history claimed over 500,000 lives in a single event. In the year 1970, a catastrophic cyclone known as the Great Bowler Cyclone struck the coastal regions of what is now the country of Bangladesh, as well as parts of neighbouring India. The storm unleashed devastating winds, torrential rains, and most deadly of all, a massive storm surge. A storm surge is essentially a huge wall of ocean water that gets pushed ashore by the force of the wind, and in this case it completely inundated and overwhelmed entire villages, farms and coastlines. The wall of water swept away people, animals and homes in just a matter of hours, leaving almost no time for evacuation or escape. Communication systems and emergency infrastructure were extremely limited at that time in history, and the densely populated coastal lands had virtually no protection against such a powerful storm. In the aftermath of the disaster, the death toll climbed to truly staggering and heartbreaking heights. Estimates from various sources range anywhere from 300,000 to well over 500,000 lives lost, making it by far the deadliest tropical cyclone in all of recorded human history. Beyond the immediate and terrible human toll, this single disaster also had profound effects that reshaped the political landscape of the entire region, fueling independence movements that would eventually lead years later to the birth of an entirely new nation. This storm was not merely a meteorological event to be studied by scientists. It was also a pivotal and tragic turning point in human history, carved into memory by the overwhelming forces of wind and water. Fact 14. A dust storm once carried billions of tons of soil all the way across the Atlantic Ocean from one continent to another. We often think of dust storms as fairly local events, perhaps covering a town or a region with sand and grit. But the atmosphere of Earth is capable of carrying far more material over far greater distances than most people realize. In the vast Sahara Desert of Africa, powerful storms sometimes lift absolutely enormous quantities of fine dust particles high up into the atmosphere, sometimes reaching several miles above the surface. Winds at those high altitudes can then carry this dust incredible distances, sometimes thousands upon thousands of miles across the Atlantic Ocean. Satellites orbiting high above Earth have captured stunning images of immense reddish-brown dust plumes drifting all the way from the coast of Africa to the continents of North and South America, creating a haze that literally spans entire oceans. When this dust finally falls back to Earth, much of it lands in the Amazon rainforest, and scientists have discovered that it actually carries important nutrients that help fertilize the vast ecosystems of the jungle. In this remarkable way, a desert on one side of the planet directly helps nourish a lush jungle on the completely opposite side of the world. However, these same massive dust storms can also cause serious air quality problems for people, dimming skies and reducing visibility, and can even disrupt normal weather patterns as the particles drift across the ocean. What might seem at first like a simple local dust storm is actually part of a truly global scale exchange of materials, linking distant and seemingly unrelated ecosystems together with invisible threads woven by the wind. Fact 15. Some volcanoes erupt underwater on the ocean floor, slowly building up entire new islands from nothing. Most of the volcanoes on Earth do not rise majestically above the ocean surface where we can see them. Instead, they are completely hidden beneath the waves scattered across the ocean floor. Along the deep-sea floor, molten rock constantly erupts from cracks in the crust, slowly creating underwater mountains and ridges that humans rarely ever see or think about. Sometimes, however, these submarine eruptions become so powerful and so persistent that they actually breach the surface of the ocean, piling layer after layer of lava and volcanic ash until a brand new island is born where none existed before. In the year 2015, an eruption in the remote South Pacific Ocean produced a completely new island that scientists initially thought would quickly crumble and erode away. But instead it persisted and grew stronger, eventually becoming a permanent home for seabirds and other wildlife. Many other examples of newborn volcanic islands can be found dotting the Pacific Ring of Fire, the vast zone of volcanic and seismic activity that circles the Pacific Ocean. Some of these newly formed islands last for only a few years or decades, before the relentless pounding of ocean waves erodes them back beneath the surface. But others grow strong and stable, becoming permanent new fixtures on world maps. These hidden eruptions happening deep beneath the sea remind us that Earth is still actively building itself, creating new land one fiery island at a time, even in the quietest and most remote corners of the ocean where no human eyes are watching. Fact 16. Fire whirls are real phenomena that look like tornadoes made entirely of spinning flames. Imagine in your mind a tornado spinning violently and destructively across an open field. Now replace all the swirling dust and debris with roaring fire and flames. That terrifying image is what scientists call a fire whirl, and they are very real even though they sound like something from a nightmare. These rare but absolutely frightening natural phenomena form when intense heat from a large wildfire creates powerful rising currents of hot air that begin to rotate and spin. The flames and glowing embers get sucked upward into the spinning vortex, transforming it into what looks like a flaming tornado that can climb hundreds of feet into the air. During the massive wildfires that ravaged California in 2018, observers and firefighters recorded fire whirls that were strong enough to flip vehicles, uproot electrical power poles, and spread the fire with terrifying speed. In Japan during the Second World War, fire whirls born from the bombing raids turned entire city blocks into deadly infernos that were almost impossible to escape. Though these spinning columns of fire are usually short-lived, lasting only minutes or sometimes hours, they are among the most dangerous and unpredictable expressions of wildfire behavior. They serve as a powerful reminder from nature that fire, when it combines with the right wind conditions, can become something truly otherworldly and absolutely terrifyingly alive, spinning across the landscape like a demon made of pure flame. Fact 17. Earthquakes can actually turn solid ground into something that behaves like liquid. When powerful seismic waves pass through certain kinds of soil, something very strange and unexpected can happen. Instead of shaking like solid rock or packed earth, the ground may suddenly and completely lose its strength and begin to behave almost exactly like a thick liquid. This bizarre phenomenon is called liquefaction, and it has been observed and documented in many major earthquakes throughout history. During the 1964 earthquake in the city of Niigata in Japan, buildings began to sink deeply into the ground and tilt at crazy angles as the soil beneath them simply gave way and turned fluid. Cars that had been parked on the street actually floated upward to the surface, as if they were sitting in water instead of on solid land. The scientific reason for this lies in the way that intense vibrations increase the water pressure trapped between tiny soil particles underground, forcing those particles apart until they can no longer support any weight at all. When this happens, entire neighborhoods can slump, slide, and collapse, not because the land cracked open, but simply because it briefly transformed into a shifting, unstable sea of soil mixed with water. Liquefaction is a sobering reminder that the earth beneath our feet, which seems so solid and dependable every single day, is actually not quite as stable as it appears. With enough shaking force applied at just the right frequency, the ground itself can temporarily melt into something fluid and treacherous. Fact 18. Avalanches can move faster downhill than a speeding race car on a highway. On snow-covered mountains, incredible beauty and extreme danger often exist side by side in an uneasy balance. A peaceful-looking slope covered in pristine white snow can transform in just an instant into a roaring, churning avalanche of destruction. When thick layers of accumulated snow suddenly break free from a mountainside, they can accelerate downhill with absolutely terrifying speed, sometimes reaching velocities faster than 100 miles per hour. That speed is actually quicker than a race car speeding down a straight highway at full throttle. These cascading waves of snow carry thousands or even millions of tons of snow, ice, rocks, and debris, violently uprooting centuries-old trees and burying anything and everything in their path under deep layers of compressed snow. The physics behind this incredible speed is relatively straightforward but stark. Gravity relentlessly pulls the enormous mass downward, and as the avalanche slides and tumbles, friction between the snow and the ground actually melts part of the lower layer into a thin lubricating layer of water, which paradoxically makes the entire avalanche move even faster instead of slowing it down. Skiers and mountaineers, who have been unfortunate enough to witness one up close, describe it as seeing a living wall of churning white chaos that swallows entire valleys in just a few minutes. Avalanches are absolutely breathtaking in their raw power and speed, constantly sculpting and reshaping mountain landscapes, and serving as humbling reminders that beneath the peaceful stillness of a winter snowscape lies one of nature's swiftest and most completely unstoppable forces. Fact 19. Some tsunamis have grown tall enough to tower higher than the tallest skyscrapers ever built. Most tsunamis that strike coastlines around the world reach heights of only a few feet when they are travelling through deep ocean water, but under certain rare and extreme conditions, they can become absolutely towering walls of water that dwarf even the tallest buildings that humans have ever constructed. In 1958, a powerful earthquake in Alaska triggered an enormous landslide of rock and ice into a narrow inlet called Lituya Bay. The sudden displacement of water created a wave that reached an almost unbelievable height of over 1,700 feet, which is significantly taller than most skyscrapers, and remains the tallest wave ever reliably recorded anywhere on Earth. The wave was so powerful and so tall that it ripped fully grown trees from steep mountain tops, scoured entire slopes completely bare of vegetation, and permanently transformed the landscape of the bay in just a matter of moments. While such mega tsunamis are extremely rare and usually confined to narrow fjords or bays where steep cliffs loom directly above deep water, they reveal to us the absolute extremes that nature is capable of reaching when truly immense forces combine in just the right way, at just the right time. Most tsunamis are devastating and deadly enough at only tens of feet in height, but trying to imagine one that towers taller than a mountain ridge is almost beyond the capacity of human comprehension. These rare monster waves carry not just water, but the raw combined energy of gravity, geology, and the ocean, unleashed together in one of the most violent natural spectacles that can possibly occur on our planet. Fact 20. the deadliest earthquake in all of recorded human history, struck China over 400 years ago. In the year 1556, the province of Shanxi in central China was violently struck by what still remains today as the deadliest earthquake in all of recorded history. Though modern estimates of its magnitude place it at around 8 on the Richter scale, which is certainly powerful but not unprecedented, the destruction and loss of life it caused were amplified enormously by the specific way that people lived in that region during that particular time period. Many communities in that area had built their homes and dwellings inside what are called loess caves, which are essentially rooms and tunnels carved directly into soft, crumbly, silty soil that forms thick deposits. When the ground began to shake violently, entire villages collapsed inward in just seconds, burying families and livestock inside with almost no chance of escape. Historical records and chronicles written at the time described mountains visibly crumbling into dust, rivers suddenly changing their courses and flowing in completely new directions, and an estimated death toll of over 800,000 people. The scale of human tragedy and suffering was completely unparalleled in history, and for many centuries afterward it stood as a dire warning deeply embedded in Chinese cultural memory. Unlike modern earthquakes that we can measure precisely with sensitive seismographs and scientific instruments, this ancient disaster is remembered primarily through written chronicles, stories, and accounts that were passed down through many generations. It shows us with terrible clarity that even long before the era of modern cities filled with tall skyscrapers and dense populations, the Earth already possessed more than enough raw power to utterly devastate entire civilizations with just a single merciless shudder lasting only a few minutes. Fact 21. Volcanic ash clouds can ground and shut down entire fleets of aircraft across multiple countries. Volcanic eruptions do not only affect the land and communities immediately surrounding them, they can also completely shut down and paralyze the skies above entire continents. When volcanic ash gets blasted high up into the atmosphere during a major eruption, it can drift and spread for thousands upon thousands of miles, carried along by high-altitude winds that distribute it across vast regions. For aircraft and aviation, this drifting ash represents an absolute nightmare scenario. The ash particles are not soft and harmless like regular dust or pollen. Instead, they are made of extremely sharp, abrasive, glassy particles that can melt when they get sucked into the superheated interior of jet engines and then immediately solidify again, coating engine components with a layer of glass that causes catastrophic mechanical failures. In the year 2010, the eruption of a volcano called Eyjafjallajökull in the remote country of Iceland released an enormous ash cloud that drifted eastward over most of Europe. Air traffic control authorities had no choice but to ground thousands of flights for nearly a week, stranding millions of frustrated passengers in airports and bringing international travel and commerce to a grinding halt. The eerie sight of completely empty skies with no contrails or planes visible anywhere was deeply unsettling, serving as a stark reminder that even our most advanced modern aviation technology is completely helpless and powerless when faced with the raw volcanic output of a single remote mountain. One eruption happening on a tiny island in the North Atlantic was enough to silence the constant hum of aircraft engines across an entire continent for days. Fact 22. Some hurricanes can persist and last for weeks at a time without weakening or dissipating. We often picture storms as relatively fleeting events that blow through quickly and then move on. But some hurricanes are remarkably stubborn and enduring, continuing to churn and rage for weeks as they drift slowly across vast stretches of open ocean. As long as they remain over a constant supply of warm ocean water, which serves as their fuel source, these storm systems can maintain their strength and intensity almost indefinitely. In the year 2016, Hurricane Matthew lasted for nearly 2 full weeks, carving a destructive path across the Caribbean islands and the southeastern coast of the United States. Other storms, particularly in the vast Pacific Ocean, have lasted even longer, with some travelling thousands upon thousands of miles over the course of many weeks before finally weakening and dissipating. These long-lived hurricanes clearly demonstrate the remarkable persistence and endurance of nature's weather machinery. Once these massive systems are set in motion and fueled by warm water, they can literally sustain themselves for extraordinary stretches of time, continuing to spin and grow for week after week. They remind us that a hurricane is not simply a single brief moment of chaos and destruction. Instead, It is a living, breathing engine powered by heat, moisture, and constant circular motion, and it will continue spinning endlessly in the same spot or drifting slowly across the ocean until something finally disrupts its delicate rhythm or cuts off its fuel supply. A hurricane that simply refuses to fade away or die is truly a haunting demonstration of nature's capacity for endurance. Fact 23. Ice storms can snap power lines and tree branches as if they were fragile twigs. When a layer of warm, moist air rides up and over a deeper layer of freezing cold air sitting close to the ground, rain begins to fall from the clouds above. But this rain freezes almost instantly upon contact with every single surface it touches. This particular combination of conditions creates what meteorologists call an ice storm, which is simultaneously one of the most beautiful and one of the most destructive weather events that can occur on Earth. Trees quickly become completely coated in thick, heavy layers of glassy, transparent ice, glittering and sparkling in the light like crystal sculptures in an enchanted forest. But the weight of all that accumulated ice is absolutely crushing and merciless. Branches that have stood strong for decades snap suddenly under the enormous strain, and power lines made of thick metal cables sag lower and lower until they finally break apart as though they were made of nothing stronger than thin twine or thread. In particularly severe ice storms, entire regions spanning hundreds of square miles can be left completely without electricity, plunged into freezing darkness for many days or even weeks at a time, while repair crews struggle to restore power. Roads become like skating rinks, completely impossible to drive on safely, and cars often become entombed in thick shells of ice. The deceptive beauty of these storms effectively hides their real danger, because the weight of frozen rain accumulating layer by layer is absolutely merciless and unforgiving. Just a single inch of ice coating can add hundreds of extra pounds of weight to a single tree limb. What looks from a distance like a gorgeous frozen winter wonderland is actually nature applying a slow, crushing grip of cold that can break almost anything it touches. Fact 24. Earthquakes happening in one location can trigger massive landslides that completely reshape distant mountains. In regions with steep mountains and unstable slopes, earthquakes very often do much more damage than simply shaking the ground and collapsing buildings. They can loosen and destabilize entire mountain slopes, sending millions upon millions of tons of rock, soil, and debris crashing downward in catastrophic landslides. These sudden avalanches of earth can completely dam rivers, bury entire valleys under hundreds of feet of rubble, and even create brand new lakes where none existed before. Fact 25. Tsunamis can move so incredibly fast that they actually outrun commercial jet aircraft. When a tsunami is travelling through the deep, open ocean far from any coastline, it does not appear as a towering, threatening wall of water. Instead, it exists as a long, low swell that stretches for hundreds of miles across the surface. But despite its deceptively calm appearance, its speed is absolutely astonishing, and almost beyond belief. Driven by the full depth of the ocean beneath it, a tsunami wave can travel at speeds exceeding 500 miles per hour, which is actually faster than a commercial jet airplane flying at its normal cruising altitude and speed. Ships floating in the open waters of the deep ocean often barely notice anything unusual as a tsunami passes directly beneath them, because the wave height in deep water might only be a few feet. But as that same wave approaches the shallow water near a coastline, it begins to slow down while simultaneously growing taller and taller, eventually transforming into the devastating walls of water that we recognize from news footage and historical accounts. Fact 26. Mega droughts can last not just for years, but for entire centuries without relief. Most of us think of droughts as something seasonal or temporary, perhaps lasting a year or two of unusually dry conditions before the rains eventually return and everything goes back to normal. But history and scientific evidence tell us a much darker and more concerning story. In the American Southwest, evidence carefully gathered from tree rings and ancient lake sediments reveals that so-called megadroughts have struck multiple times in the past, and these were not brief dry spells. They lasted not for years, but for entire centuries. These prolonged periods of extreme dryness completely reshaped entire civilizations, forcing ancient peoples to abandon their cities and homes and migrate vast distances in desperate search of water and survival. In Africa as well, mega droughts lasting generations have been directly linked to the collapse of powerful kingdoms and the widespread devastation of famine across entire regions. Such dramatic events remind us that water cycles and rainfall patterns are not always steady and predictable like we assume. Sometimes the skies essentially close and stop producing rain for multiple generations, and entire landscapes undergo profound changes as rivers gradually shrink to tiny streams, forests slowly die and turn to desert, and lakes evaporate into dry salt flats. Today, as global climate patterns continue to shift and change, scientists are issuing warnings that new megadroughts could potentially return to certain vulnerable regions. These ancient disasters serve as sobering reminders that time in nature operates on scales far vaster than human lifetimes, and even something as essential and life-giving as rain can completely vanish from a region for not just years, but for centuries at a time. Fact 27. The strongest tornadoes can strip the bark completely off living trees, leaving them pale and ghostly. The very fastest tornadoes that form on Earth are so incredibly violent and powerful that they do not simply uproot trees or snap off their branches like weaker storms. Instead, they actually strip trees completely bare, tearing away every leaf, every small twig, and even the protective bark itself. After the passage of such an extreme storm, entire landscapes look deeply surreal and almost otherworldly. Forests that once stood green and alive are reduced to ghostly fields of pale, naked tree trunks, standing like skeletons against the sky. This bizarre phenomenon happens because the winds spinning inside the tornado funnel reach such tremendously high speeds that they drive debris, dirt, gravel, and even small stones against the tree trunks at velocities approaching that of bullets fired from guns. This constant abrasive bombardment essentially sandblasts away the bark, leaving behind only smooth, scarred wood that looks almost polished. Meteorologists and storm researchers actually use these eerie signs of bark stripping to help judge and classify the true strength of tornadoes after they pass, because this particular type of damage is clear evidence of the very highest wind speeds that can possibly occur anywhere on Earth. For survivors who return to look at the damage after the storm has passed, the sight is absolutely unforgettable. Trees that were once living and covered in rough brown bark have been transformed into pale, lifeless poles. In the deep silence that settles, after the storm finally moves on, these stripped trees stand as haunting natural monuments to the absolutely incredible fury of spinning air at its most extreme and violent. Fact 28. Volcanic lightning creates spectacular displays that look like fireworks erupting from the underworld itself. During a major volcanic eruption, as thick clouds of ash and superheated gas blow violently skyward, another strange and beautiful spectacle often appears alongside the eruption itself. Lightning begins flashing and crackling within the dark, billowing plume. This phenomenon, which scientists call volcanic lightning, forms when countless tiny particles of sharp volcanic ash rub and scrape against one another inside the ash cloud, steadily building up massive amounts of static electricity until it finally explodes outward in brilliant sparks and bolts of light. The result is a sky that becomes filled with glowing branching veins of electricity, illuminating the entire eruption in what looks like a furious supernatural display. From a safe distance, it can genuinely look like fireworks launched from the underworld, with fire and lightning being unleashed together in the same terrifying moment. One of the most famous and well-documented examples of this occurred during an eruption of Mount Sakurajima in Japan, where lightning continuously arced and flashed through the thick clouds of volcanic ash for hours. These electrical displays are absolutely mesmerizing to witness, but they are also quite dangerous because the lightning bolts can strike the ground many miles away from the actual volcanic crater. Volcanic lightning serves as nature's powerful reminder that when the fire of Earth meets the air of the atmosphere, the result is not merely an eruption of lava and ash. Instead, it creates an entirely new kind of storm, one that's both dazzling and terrifying in equal measure, where geology and meteorology merge into a single spectacular event. Fact 29. The largest hailstone ever found and measured was actually bigger than a volleyball. Hailstones begin their formation as small pellets of ice inside powerful thunderclouds, where they get tossed upward again and again by extremely strong updrafts of rising air. Each time a hailstone gets lifted back up into the freezing upper regions of the cloud, a fresh new layer of water freezes onto its surface, making it gradually grow larger. Most hailstones remain relatively small, perhaps the size of peas or marbles, but in rare storms where the updrafts are exceptionally strong and persistent, the stones can grow to truly monstrous sizes. In the year 2010, in the state of South Dakota, a hailstone was discovered and measured that was over 8 inches across in diameter. That made it larger than a regulation volleyball, and it weighed almost 2 full pounds. When it finally fell from the sky, it left a deep crater in the ground where it impacted. Hailstones of such massive size are extremely rare, but they become possible whenever a thunderstorm is powerful enough to keep repeatedly lifting a stone higher and higher into the freezing atmosphere, allowing it to gather layer after layer after layer of ice, until gravity finally becomes too strong and wins the battle. When these icy boulders finally plummet to Earth, they can easily shatter car windshields, punch holes straight through roof shingles, and completely devastate entire fields of crops in minutes. They remind us with brutal clarity that even something as seemingly ordinary and harmless as rain can, under exactly the right atmospheric conditions, transform into something truly monstrous and destructive. Fact 30. Earthquakes can shift an entire coastline upward or downward overnight, redrawing maps instantly. Earthquakes are not only violent and destructive in the immediate moment when they strike, they can also leave permanent and dramatic changes carved into the physical landscape that last forever. During the Great Chilean Earthquake of 1960, which was the most powerful earthquake ever recorded, entire stretches of coastline suddenly rose upward by several feet in a single night. New beaches appeared in places where none had existed the day before, while elsewhere the land sank downward, swallowing villages, roads, and agricultural fields beneath the rising sea. In the massive Alaska earthquake of 1964, large sections of the coast dropped downward by several feet in just minutes, creating vast new tidal flats that still exist today and have become permanent features of the landscape. These dramatic shifts happen because earthquakes release enormous amounts of pent-up stress and tension along geological fault lines, sometimes forcing huge entire blocks of the Earth's crust to move suddenly upward or downward. The changes can be so dramatic and extensive that old maps and nautical charts become instantly outdated and useless, replaced overnight by a completely reshaped coastline that nobody predicted. To imagine the land that you know and walk on every day shifting upward or downward by several feet overnight is deeply disorienting and unsettling, but it is simply the reality of living on a restless, constantly moving planet. Earthquakes are not only brief moments of chaos and destruction that we experience in the moment, they are also powerful architects constantly reshaping and redrawing the Earth's ever-changing shorelines, creating new geography in mere seconds. Fact 31. Hurricanes can push enormous walls of water taller than multi-story buildings directly onto land. One of the single most destructive features of any major hurricane is not actually the wind itself, even though the wind gets the most attention. Instead, it is something called the storm surge. As a massive swirling storm approaches a coastline, its powerful spinning winds physically push vast amounts of seawater ahead of it, piling the water higher and higher until it becomes a moving wall that can tower above the surrounding landscape. In the most severe hurricane scenarios, storm surges have reached heights significantly taller than multi-story buildings, essentially creating a moving mountain of ocean water. This wall of water crashes violently inland, flooding streets and neighborhoods and sweeping away everything in its path, including cars, homes, trees, and sometimes entire communities. Unlike regular ocean waves that rush in and then quickly retreat back to the sea, a storm surge represents a sustained rise in the actual sea level itself, and it often lasts for many hours. People who have witnessed storm surges up close describe the experience as watching the ocean simply rise up like a living thing and claim the land as its own. These walls of moving water completely reshape coastlines, erase beaches that took centuries to form, and leave behind vast areas of salt-soaked ruins. When satellites capture images showing a hurricane's broad, beautiful spiral from space, hidden inside that deceptively graceful image is a rolling mountain of seawater that is fully capable of rewriting entire landscapes and erasing communities in one single catastrophic sweep. Fact 32. Some wildfires actually burn underground for many decades, smouldering invisibly beneath our feet. When most people picture a wildfire in their minds, they imagine bright orange flames racing dramatically across treetops and hillsides, consuming everything visible in their path. But some fires behave very differently. They actually retreat and descend underground, where they smoulder slowly in layers of peat, underground coal seams, or dense deposits of organic soil. These hidden underground fires can burn slowly and steadily for not just years, but for entire decades, remaining almost completely invisible on the surface except for occasional thin plumes of smoke rising from cracks in the ground. One of the most famous examples of this phenomenon is located in Centralia, Pennsylvania, where an underground coal mine fire was accidentally ignited back in the 1960s and continues burning today, more than 60 years later. In other parts of the world, particularly in Siberia and Indonesia, peat fires smouldering underground release massive amounts of smoke and pollution year after year. Unlike ordinary surface fires that firefighters can battle with water and equipment, these underground blazes are almost completely impossible to extinguish because they spread through networks of tunnels and cavities below ground where water cannot easily reach and firefighters cannot access. They can survive and continue burning even through harsh winters, then reignite surface vegetation when warm conditions return. Silent, stubborn, and remarkably enduring, these underground wildfires are sobering reminders that once fire truly takes hold in the right conditions, it can smoulder quietly and patiently for multiple generations, continuously reshaping both the air quality and the land itself in ways that are largely invisible to people living above. Fact 33. A volcanic eruption in the early 1800s actually plunged the entire world into a mini ice age. In the early 19th century, a volcano called Mount Tambora, located in Indonesia, unleashed one of the most powerful eruptions in recorded history, throwing so much ash, rock and gas high up into the atmosphere that it literally dimmed sunlight around the entire world. The year immediately following that eruption, 1816, became historically known as the year without a summer. Crops failed across Europe and North America because the growing season never truly arrived. Widespread famine spread across multiple continents, and temperatures dropped so drastically that people experienced frost and snow during months that should have been warm and productive. The sky remained hazy for months, and sunsets glowed with strange, vivid, almost unnatural colours because of the countless tiny particles suspended high in the atmosphere. Entire regions endured freezing conditions and killing frosts in what should have been the middle of summer. This dramatic global cooling was not caused by ice or winter weather spreading naturally. Instead, it was caused by volcanic aerosols and particles high in the stratosphere that reflected precious sunlight back into space before it could warm the Earth's surface. History remembers the widespread suffering and hardship it caused across multiple continents, but it also serves as a dramatic demonstration of the truly vast reach and global impact of a single, sufficiently large volcanic eruption. When a volcano of the right size erupts with enough force, its influence and effects do not stop at nearby mountainsides or even at continental coastlines. Instead, the eruption reaches upward into the atmosphere, wrapping the entire planet in a shadowy veil of volcanic ash that can cool temperatures worldwide for years. Fact 34. Earthquakes happening beneath the ocean can trigger sudden rogue waves that tower above ships. Rogue waves are sudden, towering walls of water that appear seemingly without any warning in the open ocean, often rising to heights twice as tall as the surrounding normal waves. For many centuries, these monster waves were dismissed as nothing more than exaggerated sailors' tales and maritime legends. But today, modern science and direct measurements have confirmed beyond doubt that they are completely real and genuinely dangerous. While most rogue waves are caused by the complex and chaotic mixing and interference of different ocean swells coming from different directions, earthquakes happening beneath the seafloor can also trigger them. When a powerful earthquake suddenly shifts massive sections of the ocean floor, it can send out pulses and shock waves that travel through the water and interfere with existing wave patterns, sometimes combining and building into a sudden monster wave right in the middle of the open ocean. These waves can rise as tall as multi-story buildings, appearing suddenly and slamming into ships with absolutely devastating force. Mariners who have been caught in rogue waves describe the terrifying experience of watching the sea suddenly stand up vertically in front of them, lifting their entire vessel up onto a near-vertical wall of water before crashing down into deep valleys and troughs below. Earthquakes are already extremely dangerous and destructive on land where we live, but far out at sea, their influence and energy can reach upward through the water to create these sudden, unpredictable giants that seem to appear from nowhere. It reminds us that even in the deepest waters far from any coast, the tremors and movements of the earth can still reach upward to affect everything above. Fact 35. Tornado winds can become so powerful they drive ordinary drinking straws straight through solid wood. In the immediate aftermath of the strongest and most violent tornadoes, investigators and researchers sometimes discover scenes and evidence that seem physically impossible to believe. One of the strangest and most documented phenomena is the discovery of ordinary plastic drinking straws, the kind used in restaurants and homes, driven straight through telephone poles or thick wooden planks as if they were nails shot from a powerful gun. The winds spinning inside these extreme storms accelerate even lightweight debris to such tremendously high speeds that even something as thin and fragile as a plastic straw can become a deadly high-speed projectile. Under the extreme forces and pressures present inside a tornado, the straw does not simply bend or crumble or break apart as you would expect. Instead, it pierces and penetrates solid wood like a needle. Scientists who study tornado damage believe that the extremely low air pressure inside the tornado funnel may actually soften and weaken the wood fibers temporarily, making them slightly easier to penetrate, though the exact mechanics and physics are still being actively studied and debated. To imagine standing in the path of winds so violent and extreme that the very air itself becomes filled with thousands of everyday objects, all transformed into deadly weapons, is almost unimaginable. These bizarre and unsettling details serve as haunting physical evidence of the raw and completely unpredictable violence of tornadoes at their peak intensity, where even the gentlest and most harmless household objects can be instantly transformed into dangerous instruments of destruction. Fact 36. Some floods have been powerful enough to carry entire houses miles downstream like floating toys. When rivers burst violently through their banks and levees during major flooding events, the sheer force and momentum of the rushing floodwaters can be absolutely overwhelming and unstoppable. In the most severe and catastrophic floods, whole houses have been torn completely off their foundations and swept downstream like pieces of driftwood or children's toys floating in a stream. Eyewitness accounts and news footage show buildings floating past bridges, tilting and spinning as they collide with submerged trees and other debris, sometimes travelling many miles downstream before finally breaking apart into pieces. Floodwaters are not simply clean water flowing gently. They are actually a violent churning mixture of thick mud, heavy rocks, twisted cars, uprooted trees, and anything else that gets caught and dragged along in the powerful torrent. The immense pressure and force behind these floods is measured by engineers in tons of pressure per square foot, and it is easily strong enough to collapse thick walls and snap heavy wooden or steel beams as if they were twigs. For survivors watching helplessly from higher ground, the surreal sight of a neighbour's home or a familiar building drifting slowly past is both heartbreaking and devastating. These terrible moments reveal with brutal clarity that floods are not gentle gradual rises in water level. Instead, they are rushing forces of nature with the raw strength of bulldozers, fully capable of lifting entire structures that weigh many tons and carrying them away downstream as though they were made of nothing stronger than paper or cardboard. Fact 37. Earthquakes can create brand new lakes almost overnight where none existed before. When the ground shifts and moves during a powerful earthquake, the physical landscape itself can be completely rearranged and resculpted in minutes. Rivers get suddenly blocked by fallen debris, valleys become dammed by landslides, and new depressions and basins open up in the earth where none existed just moments before. In these dramatic moments, entirely new lakes can appear almost overnight. After the devastating Sichuan earthquake in China in 2008, rescue workers and satellite images revealed that entire valleys had filled with water as massive landslides blocked the natural flow of rivers, forming dozens of brand new lakes within just days. Some of these newly created lakes grew large enough to completely swallow villages and farmland, while others became permanent additions to maps and will likely remain for centuries or longer. The sudden creation of these earthquake lakes often poses serious secondary dangers because the natural dams holding back the water are usually unstable and can collapse without warning, unleashing devastating flash floods onto communities downstream. Yet these new lakes also begin to reshape the natural environment almost immediately, creating new habitats for birds, fish, and aquatic plants. To witness a completely new lake appearing after an earthquake is to see the Earth actively resculpting itself in real time right before your eyes, turning what was once solid dry ground into a deep watery basin as easily as if the planet were moulding soft clay with invisible hands. Fact 38. Hurricanes can spawn dozens of tornadoes as they make landfall, creating chaos within chaos. As if the devastating winds and torrential rains of a major hurricane were not dangerous enough on their own, these monstrous storm systems often give birth to something even more chaotic and unpredictable. They create tornadoes. When a hurricane finally makes landfall and begins moving over solid ground, the extreme turbulence and wind shear along its outer edges can spin up dozens of smaller tornado funnels, each one possessing its own destructive power. These tornadoes spawned by hurricanes are usually somewhat weaker than the most violent tornadoes that are spawned by supercell thunderstorms in the Great Plains, but their sheer number and unpredictability make them absolutely devastating. During Hurricane Ivan in 2004, more than 100 separate tornadoes were recorded and documented across the southeastern United States. Survivors often describe the deeply eerie and unsettling feeling of successfully surviving the main hurricane itself, only to suddenly face urgent tornado warning sirens blaring afterward. It serves as a stark reminder that hurricanes are not simply single, unified storms. They are vast, complex systems filled with smaller storms nested within them, like a fractal pattern of chaos. From the broad storm surges that inundate coastlines, to the narrow spinning funnels of tornadoes that carve random paths of destruction, hurricanes create devastation simultaneously on multiple different scales, making them among the most complex and dangerous weather phenomena on Earth. Fact 39. Tsunamis can actually cause the entire Earth's rotation to slow down by tiny amounts. The total mass of our planet is absolutely enormous and almost beyond human comprehension. But even our massive Earth can be physically nudged and affected by great movements of water and rock on its surface. When a giant tsunami is triggered by a major earthquake, trillions upon trillions of tons of ocean water suddenly surge and race across the sea. This enormous redistribution of mass from one location to another has a subtle but measurable effect on the Earth's rotation. After the devastating Indian Ocean earthquake and tsunami in 2004, scientists using extremely sensitive instruments detected a very slight slowing of the Earth's spin, which changed the length of each day by a few millionths of a second. Though this change is completely imperceptible to daily life, and far too small for any human to notice, it serves as a powerful reminder that the planet itself physically responds to the violent shifting of its surface and seas. These changes are incredibly small, but they are completely real, representing cumulative ripples of massive disasters that actually affect the rotational rhythm of the entire globe. Tsunamis are not merely local tragedies affecting coastal communities. At their largest scale, they are genuine planetary events that can alter the physical balance and motion of the very world spinning beneath our feet. Fact 40. The loudest sound ever reliably heard by humans was produced by a volcanic eruption. In August of 1883, the catastrophic eruption of Krakatoa volcano in Indonesia produced a sound so unimaginably loud that it literally circled the entire globe multiple times. Sailors on ships located hundreds of miles away from the volcano had their eardrums violently burst from the intensity of the sound. Sensitive barometers located around the world recorded the massive shockwave passing by again and again for many days as it circled the planet. Scientists have estimated that the explosion was over 10,000 times more powerful than the largest hydrogen bombs ever tested. Islanders living relatively close to the eruption tried to describe the sound afterward, saying it was like the sky itself cracking open and splitting apart. followed immediately by a wall of noise so overwhelming and all-encompassing that it truly defied any description. Even on faraway continents thousands of miles distant, people reported hearing muffled echoes of Krakatoa's fury rolling across the landscape. It remains to this day the loudest sound ever reliably documented and recorded in human history. It was a thunderclap of pure Earth's power that carried around the entire circumference of the planet. The sound itself actually became a disaster in its own right, deafening and permanently injuring those who heard it up close, and etching itself permanently into history as an unforgettable reminder that when the Earth truly roars with its full voice, the whole world has no choice but to listen. Fact 41. A volcano in Alaska once erupted almost continuously for nearly 3 full years. Most volcanic eruptions that we hear about last for only days or perhaps weeks before the volcano quiets down again and returns to dormancy. But some volcanic eruptions linger far longer, producing constant activity that steadily reshapes the surrounding landscape over extended periods. In the early 20th century, Mount Pavlov volcano located in remote Alaska erupted almost continuously for nearly 3 full years without stopping. Steady streams of glowing lava and clouds of ash poured from its vent day after day, creating an almost constant spectacle of fire and smoke visible for many miles. For the small remote communities living nearby, the erupting volcano became an ever-present background feature of daily life, a mountain that simply never seemed to rest or sleep. Such prolonged eruptions are quite rare, but they are not completely unheard of in volcanic regions. Some volcanoes around the world can simmer with low-level activity for many decades, releasing magma in steady pulses rather than explosive bursts. These long-lived eruptions remind us that volcanic activity is not always sudden, violent and explosive like we see in disaster movies. Sometimes it is slow, drawn out and persistent, like a slow, steady burn of the Earth's hot interior pressing relentlessly outward toward the surface. To live within sight of such a continuously active mountain is to be constantly reminded every single day of the Earth's simmering heart beating beneath the solid crust. Fact 42. Some earthquakes are completely silent and can only be detected by sensitive scientific instruments. Not all earthquakes arrive with violent jolts, dramatic shaking, and the sound of buildings rattling. Some earthquakes creep along so silently and gradually that humans living directly above them do not feel even the slightest thing. These unusual events are known to scientists as slow-slip earthquakes, and they unfold over days or even weeks rather than seconds, releasing their seismic energy without the sudden violent shocks that we normally associate with earthquakes. Sensitive instruments placed in the ground can detect them as steady, slow creeping movements occurring along fault lines deep underground. Though these slow earthquakes feel gentle and harmless, scientists have learned that they are not without danger. Research suggests that slow slip quakes can sometimes trigger more violent and dangerous earthquakes nearby by redistributing stress along connected faults. These silent earthquakes are completely invisible to all of our human senses, but they remind us that the Earth's tectonic plates are constantly and endlessly in motion, grinding against each other in ways that are sometimes violent and sometimes subtle. Beneath our feet at this very moment, a hidden drama is constantly playing out. Even when we feel absolutely nothing and life seems completely normal, the planet is continuously shifting, adjusting and reshaping itself with quiet but relentless persistence. Fact 43. Fire tornadoes can lift burning debris thousands of feet high into the sky. In the most extreme and intense wildfires, flames and powerful winds sometimes combine together to create spinning vortices that genuinely resemble tornadoes made entirely of fire. These so-called fire tornadoes are towering columns of flame and thick black smoke that spin with terrifying speed and force, sometimes reaching thousands of feet into the sky. During California's devastating car fire in 2018, one particular fire tornado grew as tall as a skyscraper and generated winds estimated at over 100 miles per hour. It violently uprooted fully grown trees, flipped vehicles completely over, and hurled burning debris across entire neighborhoods. Witnesses who saw it described the experience as watching a whirling tower of living fire, completely alive with swirling sparks and roaring like a jet engine at full power. Fire tornadoes are among the rarest and most dangerous phenomena that can occur during wildfires, and they are capable of spreading flames across vast distances in just minutes. They show us with terrifying clarity how when fire and weather patterns collide under exactly the right conditions, the results can be something that feels almost otherworldly and supernatural, a living, breathing inferno that has been spun into the shape of a destructive storm. Fact 44. Tsunamis can bend and wrap around islands to strike shores from unexpected directions. Most waves in the ocean behave predictably and cast clear shadows, meaning that obstacles like islands block them and create sheltered, calm areas behind them. But tsunamis behave very differently because of their unique properties. Because tsunami wavelengths are so incredibly long, sometimes stretching hundreds of miles, they can actually diffract and bend around islands, headlands and other obstacles, wrapping around barriers and striking shores that people assumed would be completely safe and protected. After the devastating Indian Ocean tsunami in 2004, some beaches that were shielded by large islands still suffered terrible devastation because the waves managed to bend around the protective barriers. This highly unusual property makes tsunamis extremely difficult to predict and almost impossible to escape by hiding behind natural barriers. Unlike ordinary ocean waves that simply break and stop against a solid cliff, a tsunami can arrive from multiple different directions simultaneously, bending around obstacles and sometimes colliding with itself in complex interference patterns. For people anxiously awaiting the arrival of the wave and trying to find safety, the result can be deeply confusing and ultimately deadly. It serves as an important reminder that tsunamis are not ordinary water waves following simple rules. They are deep ocean-spanning pulses of pure energy that obey their own unique physical laws, bending and curving around the world until they finally find a vulnerable place to violently release all their accumulated strength. Fact 45. Floodwaters in motion can move with the crushing force of bulldozers. When floodwaters begin to surge and flow, they carry truly enormous amounts of kinetic energy and momentum. Just 6 inches of rapidly moving water is enough to knock a full-grown adult person completely off their feet, and 2 feet of flowing water can easily sweep away a car weighing thousands of pounds. When you multiply this power across entire rivers overflowing their banks, the results become absolutely staggering. Engineers who study floods often compare the force of moving floodwaters to heavy bulldozers, pushing everything out of their way, including thick walls, parked vehicles, and even bridges. Unlike mechanical bulldozers that push from one direction, however, floodwaters push everywhere at once, pressing against every single surface with relentless and unstoppable power. People who manage to survive flash floods often describe the terrifying sound of heavy rocks grinding together and large trees crashing and splintering, with the water itself roaring past with unstoppable fury. The debris that gets carried along by the flood only adds to its overall destructive force, with heavy objects constantly battering and smashing against everything in the path. To witness a major flood in motion is to realize and truly understand that water is not just a gentle necessity of life that we drink and use every day. It is also one of nature's most efficient and powerful engines of pure destruction, fully capable of tearing apart entire landscapes with terrifying ease when it flows with enough speed and volume. Fact 46. Earthquakes can trigger geysers to erupt unexpectedly far away from the epicenter. Earthquakes do not always leave their most dramatic marks only at the epicenter where the shaking is strongest. In regions with significant geothermal activity happening underground, the vibrations and seismic waves from a distant earthquake can ripple through complex underground water systems, disturbing the delicate balances of heat, pressure, and water. Geysers that usually erupt on highly predictable schedules, almost like clockwork, can suddenly explode and shoot water high into the air completely out of turn and without warning. After major earthquakes struck in California and Alaska, geysers located in Yellowstone National Park, which is hundreds of miles away, erupted unexpectedly and remained unusually restless and active for many days afterward. The seismic waves had travelled through the Earth's crust over vast distances, somehow stirring and agitating the hidden reservoirs of superheated water beneath the famous park. It serves as a striking example of just how deeply interconnected all of Earth's systems truly are, A powerful earthquake happening in one region can somehow whisper to pools of boiling water located many miles away, coaxing and encouraging that water upward in dramatic plumes of steam and spray. These distant responses remind us clearly that Earth is truly a single resonant body, where even a brief tremor in one place can cause water, steam, and fire to stir and respond in another place very far away. Fact 47. Some landslides can travel downhill faster than race cars speeding on a track. When steep slopes suddenly collapse and fail, they sometimes do so with a speed and violence that truly defies imagination and belief. The largest and most catastrophic landslides can accelerate rapidly downhill, at speeds exceeding 200 miles per hour, which is faster than many professional race cars travelling at top speed. The reason for this incredible velocity lies in the immense weight and momentum of millions of tons of rock and soil, combined with lubricating factors like rainwater or melting ice that dramatically reduce friction. As the massive landslide barrels downward, it gathers more and more momentum with every passing second, violently smashing through forests and filling valleys. Survivors who witnessed major landslides from a distance describe the sound as absolutely deafening, like continuous thunder rolling and rumbling through the ground itself. In a place called Tanfjord in Alaska in 2015, a massive landslide released so much material so quickly and with such force that it actually generated a tsunami wave over 600 feet high. These lightning-fast avalanches of earth and rock demonstrate that mountains and hillsides are not nearly as still and stable as they appear. Under the right conditions, they can collapse in mere seconds, unleashing raw, destructive power that rivals the fastest and most violent storms anywhere on the planet. Fact 48. A volcanic eruption thousands of years ago created an entirely new lake. Volcanoes do not only build mountains and create dramatic landscapes of rock and ash, they can also sculpt vast, beautiful lakes that last for thousands of years. When Mount Mazama erupted approximately 7,000 years ago in what is now the state of Oregon, it expelled so much magma from deep underground that the entire mountain collapsed inward on itself, forming a massive crater called a caldera. Over many centuries, rain and melting snow gradually filled the deep depression, slowly creating what we now know as Crater Lake, one of the deepest and most stunningly beautiful lakes anywhere in the world. Its waters are famously clear and intensely blue, providing a tranquil reminder of the lake's violent, fiery origins. Similar events have happened in other volcanic regions around the world, where collapsed volcanic calderas eventually become basins that fill with water. These crater lakes are often surrounded by steep, dramatic cliffs that clearly show the outlines of their explosive birth. They remind us that destruction and creation in nature are often completely inseparable, happening together as part of the same event. A single powerful eruption can completely erase a mountain from the landscape, yet in its absence and over time, it may leave behind something breathtakingly beautiful, a still shimmering lake born directly from fire and violence. Fact 49. Hurricanes with their storm surges have occasionally carried sharks and other marine life far inland. Storm surges and severe flooding from major hurricanes have occasionally swept marine life far from their natural ocean habitat. In some extreme documented cases, eyewitnesses and news reports have described sharks being washed inland by the surging floodwaters, leaving them stranded in streets, parking lots, or fields once the floodwaters finally receded back to the sea. These events are relatively rare but entirely possible, given the absolutely enormous volume of seawater that gets physically pushed ashore during a major hurricane. Scientists who study storm surges and their effects note that fish, dolphins, and even small whales can potentially be displaced and carried inland when hurricanes dramatically and violently reshape coastlines. For communities that have been struck by these devastating storms, the sudden and unexpected appearance of ocean predators and other sea creatures in completely unexpected places adds a surreal and almost unbelievable twist to the already overwhelming devastation. It serves as a vivid and unforgettable reminder that hurricanes effectively blur the normal boundaries between land and sea, physically carrying the ocean inland and leaving behind strange, dangerous, and sometimes deadly surprises scattered across the landscape in their wake. Fact 50. A tsunami triggered over a century ago actually circled the entire globe multiple times. When the volcano Krakatoa erupted catastrophically in 1883, it generated tsunamis so incredibly powerful that they radiated outward across all the world's oceans. Scientific instruments at tide gauge stations located around the world recorded the waves circling the entire globe not just once, but actually several times over a period of many days. Though the waves became smaller and less dangerous with each circuit around the planet, they remained detectable for days as they bounced back and forth, reflecting off distant coastlines and travelling in both directions. This was one of the earliest events in scientific history where researchers truly realised and understood the genuinely global nature and reach of tsunamis. A single volcanic eruption happening in one remote corner of the planet had lifted ripples and pulses that could be clearly measured halfway around the world. Today, with extremely sensitive instruments and global monitoring networks, scientists know that many large tsunamis create vibrations and waves that reverberate globally, echoing and resonating like enormous bells ringing through the ocean long after the initial triggering event. They are truly planetary-scale events, setting all the oceans into complex oscillations that continue until the energy finally dissipates completely into random motion and heat. Fact 51. Earthquakes can make church bells ring on their own, miles away from the epicenter. During powerful earthquakes, the shaking and vibrations can travel outward in seismic waves that ripple across entire regions, sometimes covering hundreds of miles. In rare but well-documented cases, these travelling waves become strong enough to set various objects in motion even in towns and cities that are located far from the actual source of the shaking. Historical accounts and records describe church bells beginning to ring completely on their own during major earthquakes, even in communities that were hundreds of miles away from where the earthquake originated. One particularly notable example occurred during the Great New Madrid earthquakes of the early 1800s in the central United States, when church bells in cities located hundreds of miles away from the epicenter began tolling and chiming without any human hands touching them. This strange phenomenon happens because the vibrations travel through the solid ground and then transfer their energy into buildings and structures, causing hanging objects like bells to swing just enough to strike their metal clappers against the sides. For people who lived through these terrifying events, the eerie sound of bells chiming and ringing during the chaos and confusion of an earthquake must have felt deeply unsettling, as though the earth itself were somehow tolling its own alarm in strange harmony with human instruments. It remains one of the more mysterious and haunting side effects of major seismic events. Fact 52. Some wildfires burn so incredibly hot that they create their own massive clouds in the sky. Most clouds that we see in the sky form naturally when water vapor rises and condenses as it cools at higher altitudes. But in the heart of an extremely intense wildfire, a completely different kind of cloud can be born through a different process. These are called pyrocumulonimbus clouds, and they are vast thunderous towers that get created when extreme heat from the fire drives massive amounts of smoke and hot air violently skyward. The rising column of superheated air can climb tens of thousands of feet into the atmosphere, cooling rapidly as it rises until moisture begins to condense at the top. The result is a cloud formation that looks remarkably similar to a severe thunderstorm, but it is actually fueled entirely by fire rather than normal atmospheric processes. Inside these fire-generated clouds, lightning crackles and flashes, and those lightning strikes sometimes spark completely new blazes many miles away from the original fire. These fire-borne storms become so intense and powerful that satellites orbiting high above Earth can clearly see them from space, appearing as glowing plumes rising into the stratosphere. They represent some of the most dramatic examples of how large wildfires can fundamentally reshape and alter the atmosphere itself, effectively turning destructive fire into weather patterns. Witnessing one of these clouds forming is to see the normal line between Earth and sky becoming blurred, as heat and smoke climb upward until they literally transform themselves into a storm system all their own. Fact 53. Avalanches can release more destructive power and energy than exploding bombs. An avalanche might look at first glance like a simple rush of snow tumbling down a mountainside, but the total energy locked inside its falling mass is absolutely staggering and difficult to comprehend. As thousands or millions of tons of snow and ice cascade rapidly down a steep slope, their combined weight and acceleration release energy that equals small explosive devices, and the largest avalanches can rival the force of multiple bombs detonating simultaneously. A large avalanche can easily unleash the equivalent energy of hundreds of tons of TNT explosive in just a matter of minutes. This concentrated power snaps mature trees like fragile twigs, buries entire valleys under crushing weight, and scours mountain slopes completely bare of everything. Survivors who have experienced being caught inside an avalanche describe the experience as being trapped inside a roaring freight train, made of snow. The snow becomes incredibly dense and suffocating, carrying unimaginable force and pressure. Scientists and engineers who study avalanches often compare their destructive potential to artillery fire or bombing, with pressure waves that are strong enough to collapse sturdy structures even before the actual snowmass arrives. These massive torrents of white remind us that snow, which usually falls so gently and peacefully from the sky, can accumulate in layers on mountainsides that hold truly devastating strength, waiting silently for only the slightest trigger to come thundering downhill with the force of an explosion. Fact 54. Hurricanes can actually grow significantly stronger overnight by continuously feeding on warm ocean water. Hurricanes are essentially giant heat engines that are powered by warmth. As long as they remain positioned over warm ocean waters, they can continuously draw energy from the endless reservoir of heat beneath their swirling clouds. Sometimes this fueling process can cause sudden and unexpected surges in strength, a phenomenon that meteorologists call rapid intensification. A storm that seemed manageable and relatively weak in the evening can awaken the next morning transformed into a monster, with its wind speeds doubled and its central pressure dramatically plummeted. This frightening phenomenon has been observed in several recent major hurricanes, leaving coastal communities scrambling desperately with very little time to prepare or evacuate. The process occurs most dramatically when ocean temperatures are especially high, and when upper-level winds in the atmosphere are calm and favourable, allowing the storm's internal heat engine to run at maximum efficiency without any interference. For scientists and weather forecasters, accurately predicting these sudden bursts of intensification remains an enormous challenge and an active area of research. For people living in the path of these storms, the rapid transformation feels almost alive and intentional, as though the storm itself had taken a deep breath of warm ocean water and suddenly grown far more powerful in the blink of an eye, becoming deadly just before making landfall. Fact 55. The Dust Bowl was a disaster created by both wind and human choices about farming. In the 1930s, the American Great Plains region experienced one of the most devastating environmental disasters in all of history, an event that became known as the Dust Bowl. Years of severe drought combined with decades of aggressive farming practices that had systematically stripped the land of its protective native grasses. When powerful winds swept across the exposed plains, they lifted the bare topsoil into enormous choking dust storms that darkened skies for hours at a time. These storms buried entire towns under drifts of fine dust and suffocated livestock in the fields. Families discovered their homes filled with dust despite having closed all the windows and doors tightly. Entire farms became completely unproductive and had to be abandoned, and many desperate families migrated westward in search of survival and opportunity. The Dust Bowl was not caused by a single sudden natural event like an earthquake or hurricane. Instead, it unfolded slowly over many years, shaped by the combination of natural drought cycles and human decisions about how to use the land. It serves as a powerful reminder that disasters are not always sudden violent events. Sometimes they unfold gradually over time, shaped directly by the way people choose to live with and use the land around them. The legacy and lessons of the Dust Bowl still echo strongly today in ongoing discussions about soil conservation, sustainable agriculture, water management, and human responsibility toward the environment. Fact 56. Some earthquakes last for only a few seconds while others rumble on for several minutes. Not all earthquakes feel the same or last the same amount of time when they strike. Some earthquakes arrive with a sharp, sudden jolt that rattles windows and knocks objects off shelves, but then the shaking fades away in only a few seconds before everything returns to stillness. Other earthquakes, however, rumble on and on for what feels like long, dreadful minutes, with the ground rolling in waves that seem completely endless. The difference in duration depends primarily on the length of the geological fault line that slips and ruptures, as well as the total amount of energy that gets released. Smaller earthquakes may release their pent-up energy very quickly in a brief burst, while truly massive earthquakes, such as the 9.5 magnitude Chilean earthquake of 1960, can rupture fault lines stretching hundreds of miles, causing the ground to shake continuously for up to 10 full minutes. For people experiencing the shaking, time stretches unbearably and feels distorted. A few seconds of violent shaking can feel subjectively like forever, but long minutes of continuous rolling and shaking are genuinely unforgettable, as buildings sway back and forth, ground cracks open visibly, and the entire world refuses to become steady and still. Earthquakes remind us powerfully that time is not only something we measure objectively on clocks and watches. Sometimes time is something we feel subjectively in the unrelenting rhythm and motion of a restless planet. Fact 57. Tsunamis move faster than race cars even when travelling through deep ocean water. When an earthquake or massive landslide suddenly displaces huge sections of the seafloor, the resulting tsunami wave carries an absolutely immense amount of energy and momentum. In the open ocean, far from any coastline, this energy spreads through the full depth of the water column, propelling the wave forward at truly astonishing speeds. Some tsunamis have been measured travelling at well over 500 miles per hour, which is significantly faster than most race cars can travel even on straight tracks. Out in the deep water, the wave height may be only a few feet tall and almost completely invisible to any passing ships. Yet the incredible speed makes these waves absolutely relentless and unstoppable, racing across entire oceans toward distant coasts. Hours later, after travelling thousands of miles, that same stored energy rises dramatically into towering walls of water that crash violently ashore, devastating everything in their path. The deceptive calm appearance of a tsunami when it is far out at sea is actually part of what makes it so dangerous. Fact 58. The deadliest volcano in all of recorded history darkened skies worldwide for years. In April of 1815, Mount Tambora, located in Indonesia, erupted with a force that remains unmatched in all of modern recorded history. The massive explosion ejected so much volcanic ash and sulfur dioxide gas high into the atmosphere that it effectively blocked sunlight across much of the world for several years. The year immediately following the eruption became historically known as the year without a summer across much of Europe and North America. Temperatures plunged dramatically, harvests failed completely, and widespread famine spread across multiple continents. In some regions, snow actually fell in midsummer, and skies glowed continuously, with eerie, unnatural sunsets caused by volcanic particles. The eruption itself killed tens of thousands of people in the immediate vicinity, but its long-term climatic effects caused suffering and starvation for millions of people around the entire world. This single catastrophic event demonstrated clearly how deeply interconnected all of Earth's natural systems truly are. A volcanic mountain erupting on one remote island fundamentally altered the skies and weather patterns of the entire planet for years. Fact 59. Some tornadoes actually spin backward compared to the usual direction. Most tornadoes that form in the northern hemisphere naturally spin counterclockwise when viewed from above, shaped by the rotation of the Earth itself and prevailing wind patterns in the atmosphere. But in rare and unusual cases, tornadoes can form that rotate in the opposite direction, spinning clockwise instead. These unusual tornadoes are called anticyclonic tornadoes by meteorologists, and they often appear on the outer edges of large storm systems or within particularly complex weather patterns. Though anticyclonic tornadoes are generally somewhat less powerful than their normal counterclockwise spinning cousins, they can still cause immense destruction and pose serious danger. Meteorologists study these backward spinning tornadoes carefully to better understand the delicate and complex balance of air currents that allow such reversed spirals to form in the first place. Fact 60. Earthquakes can break open brand new canyons and chasms in just an instant. We usually imagine canyons as features that are carved very slowly over many millennia by rivers, patiently cutting through rock and by gradual erosion. But powerful earthquakes can actually create dramatic new chasms and deep cracks in mere moments. During major earthquakes, the ground can literally split apart, leaving jagged fissures and cracks that stretch for miles across the landscape. In the devastating Tangshan earthquake in China in 1976, enormous cracks opened up that were wide enough to completely swallow cars and small buildings. In New Zealand's earthquake in 2010, farmers woke up after the shaking stopped to find deep rifts cutting directly across their previously flat farmland, as though the earth itself had been sliced open with a giant invisible knife. These sudden ruptures and cracks may later erode and widen into larger valleys over time, eventually becoming permanent features of the changed landscape. Fact 61. A volcano in Iceland once shut down air travel across all of Europe. In the year 2010, the eruption of Eyjafjallajökull volcano in Iceland hurled massive plumes of volcanic ash high into the atmosphere above the North Atlantic. Winds carried the ash cloud eastward across northern Europe, where it posed an extremely severe hazard to all aircraft. Volcanic ash is composed of sharp, glassy particles that can melt when they get sucked into jet engines, coating internal components in glass and causing catastrophic failures that can bring down planes. As a direct result, aviation authorities made the difficult decision to ground nearly all flights across Europe for almost a full week. Millions of passengers found themselves stranded in airports, and international commerce slowed dramatically to a crawl. It was one of the largest and most disruptive air travel interruptions in all of modern history, all caused by a relatively modest eruption from a single remote volcano. The event highlighted powerfully just how interconnected our modern world has become, and how something as natural and simple as ash, drifting through the sky, can completely silence one of humanity's most advanced technologies. In the eternal contest between Earth's natural forces and human machines, Earth still clearly holds the upper hand and can ground our most sophisticated aircraft with nothing more than a cloud of fine particles. Fact 62. Some lightning strikes actually travel upward into space instead of downward. While most lightning bolts that we see dart downward from storm clouds toward the ground below, some lightning actually does the exact opposite and shoots upward. Known to scientists as sprites and jets, these rare and unusual forms of lightning shoot upward from the tops of thunderstorms into the upper atmosphere, and in some cases they extend toward the very edge of space itself. Sprites appear as vast red branching tendrils spreading above storm systems, sometimes stretching upward for tens of miles. Blue jets, meanwhile, shoot upward like glowing lances or spears of light. Fact 63. Landslides. Falling into water can generate waves taller than the tallest skyscrapers. When an enormous mass of rock and earth suddenly collapses and falls into a body of water, the violent displacement can create waves of absolutely staggering height. In 1958, a massive landslide in Lituya Bay, Alaska triggered a wave that reached over 1,700 feet high, making it significantly taller than most skyscrapers ever built, and the tallest wave ever recorded anywhere on Earth. Fully grown trees were violently stripped from mountainsides hundreds of feet above the normal sea level, and the entire landscape was permanently altered in seconds. Scientists call these events mega tsunamis to distinguish them from traditional tsunamis that are caused by underwater earthquakes. The sheer volume of falling material physically pushes water upward in an incredibly violent surge, creating waves that absolutely dwarf anything seen in normal open ocean storms. Thankfully, such extreme events are quite rare and usually confined to narrow bays and fjords where steep, unstable cliffs loom directly above deep water. But they serve as powerful reminders of how gravity alone, simply pulling a mountain slope downward, can unleash forces far greater than most storms. A collapsing hillside can transform in mere seconds into the tallest and most destructive waves anywhere on Earth. Fact 64. Earthquakes can be so powerful they make the entire Earth ring like a struck bell. When a truly massive earthquake strikes somewhere on the planet, its energy does not simply stay localized near the epicenter. Instead, seismic waves ripple through the entire planet from the surface down to the core and back again, causing the entire Earth to reverberate for days afterward, as if the whole planet were a gigantic bell that had been struck by an invisible hammer. Sensitive seismograph instruments have recorded Earth ringing and vibrating for many days after major earthquakes like the Alaska quake in 1964 and the Indian Ocean quake in 2004. These vibrations occur at frequencies far too low for any humans to feel directly, but seismographs capture them as ghostly oscillations that circle around Earth again and again, slowly fading. Scientists study these planetary vibrations carefully to learn important details about the structure and composition of Earth's deep interior, essentially using natural disasters as accidental experiments. Though terrifying and tragic in their immediate impact on human life, these massive quakes also reveal the planet as a resonant body humming with deep tones. In the aftermath of destruction and tragedy, Earth itself becomes like a musical instrument, singing its own hidden song across the vastness of its spherical body. Fact 65. Some hurricanes have eyes so clear and calm that you can see stars shining through them at night. At the very heart and center of every hurricane lies a region called the Eye, which is a remarkably calm zone where winds die down dramatically and skies often open up and clear. Pilots who deliberately fly aircraft into storms to study them describe the experience as completely surreal and almost dreamlike. After battling through fierce walls of violent winds and torrential rain for extended periods, they suddenly emerge into complete stillness and calm. Sometimes the Eye is so perfectly clear that the blue sky becomes visible during the day, and even stars can be seen shining brightly at night, all framed by towering walls of dark cloud on every side. Fact 66. Tsunamis could theoretically be triggered by large meteor strikes hitting the ocean, though most tsunamis throughout history have been caused by underwater earthquakes or massive landslides. Scientists know and understand that a sufficiently large meteor or asteroid plunging into the ocean could potentially unleash waves of truly unimaginable scale. When a large space rock strikes the ocean, it displaces absolutely massive amounts of water almost instantly, sending powerful tsunamis racing outward in all directions from the impact point. Fact 67. Tornadoes can flatten grass in perfect circular patterns that look almost intentional. After a tornado finally passes through an area, the marks and patterns it leaves on the landscape are often strange, beautiful, and deeply unsettling all at the same time. One particularly eerie signature that tornadoes leave behind is the way grass and crops are sometimes pressed completely flat in precise circular patterns. These swirls and spirals form when the tornado's rotating winds spiral downward toward the ground, pressing vegetation into the earth as though a giant invisible hand had carefully smoothed it down. Farmers have reported finding entire fields patterned with concentric rings and spirals after storms pass, resembling crop circles but created entirely by natural forces rather than anything mysterious. Scientists study these subtle imprints carefully to better understand the detailed structure of tornado winds near the ground, where the violent storm interacts directly with the surface. To walk slowly through such a field after a storm has passed is deeply unsettling. The silence of flattened grass whispers quietly of the chaos that spun violently above it just hours before. These circular scars are delicate signatures of one of nature's most violent phenomena, representing patterns of order that get drawn out of complete disorder. Fact 68. Earthquakes can cause entire rivers to vanish underground suddenly. In certain regions with specific geology, earthquakes possess the strange and unsettling ability to make rivers completely disappear. When the ground shifts violently during a major earthquake, it can open up new cracks and fissures or block old natural channels, suddenly diverting water underground into hidden caverns. Historical records from China and South America describe rivers that suddenly dried up completely after earthquakes, struck, with their waters being swallowed entirely by new fissures that opened in the earth. In some documented cases, entire streams have been redirected underground, creating completely new surface courses that reshape local landscapes permanently. Fact 69. Volcanic ash can travel completely around the world in just a few days. When a volcano erupts explosively with sufficient force, it throws enormous quantities of ash and fine particles high into the atmosphere, sometimes reaching altitudes of over 50,000 feet. At these extreme altitudes, powerful jet stream winds can carry the ash across entire continents in just a matter of days. After the catastrophic eruption of Mount Pinatubo in 1991, volcanic ash circled the entire globe multiple times, dimming sunlight significantly and creating brilliant, vivid sunsets thousands of miles away. Pilots flying in distant regions far from the volcano reported hazy skies filled with fine particles, completely unaware at first that the ash they encountered had travelled halfway around the world. Ash clouds this widespread can disrupt global weather patterns, measurably cool average temperatures, and affect aviation safety far beyond the immediate eruption site. The journey of volcanic ash demonstrates clearly how interconnected Earth's atmosphere truly is across vast distances. What begins as an eruption in one corner of the world may eventually touch skies everywhere. A single mountain's violent outburst can leave its fingerprint across the entire globe, written in the form of veiled sunsets and faint layers of dust drifting high above. Fact 70. Some ice storms coat trees in crystal layers that are several inches thick. Ice storms rank among the most visually enchanting yet dangerous natural disasters that occur. As freezing rain falls continuously, it coats absolutely every surface it touches with layer after layer of clear ice, transforming branches, power lines, and rooftops into gleaming glass sculptures. In particularly severe storms, these ice coatings can grow several inches thick, turning entire forests into sparkling crystalline wonderlands. The accumulated weight, however, becomes absolutely devastating. Branches snap under the crushing burden, mature trees topple completely, and power lines sag dangerously under hundreds of pounds of added ice weight. Fact 71. Hurricanes can grow large enough to cover entire countries simultaneously. From high orbit aboard satellites, hurricanes appear as great, beautiful spirals painted across the blue ocean, but their true scale becomes even more astonishing when measured carefully. Some storms grow so incredibly vast that they literally span entire countries, covering hundreds of miles from their outer edge to outer edge. In 2005, Hurricane Katrina stretched across much of the Gulf of Mexico, with its cloud shield engulfing several entire states at once. In 2017, Hurricane Irma's reach became so wide that it covered nearly all of Florida simultaneously from coast to coast. Within these absolutely immense systems, the eye itself may appear relatively small, just a tranquil circle surrounded by towering walls of cloud. Yet the storm's spiral arms stretch outward for hundreds of miles in all directions, continuously pulling in moisture from the warm ocean and unleashing bands of rain far from the centre. Standing beneath one of these sprawling continent-sized storms is to truly realise how tiny human structures and cities are compared to the immense scale of Earth's atmosphere. Entire countries disappear beneath the swirl, hidden completely under a living breathing machine made of air and water. Fact 72. Earthquakes can create natural dams by causing landslides that block rivers. When mountainsides collapse suddenly during powerful earthquakes, the enormous debris often tumbles down and blocks rivers flowing through valleys, forming natural dams almost instantly. These sudden barriers can hold back enormous lakes, sometimes stretching for many miles upstream. One particularly dramatic example occurred after the Sichuan earthquake in China in 2008, where dozens of such earthquake-created lakes appeared within days, with many of them threatening to burst and flood villages downstream. While some of these natural dams prove stable and last for centuries or even longer, many others are dangerously unstable and can collapse suddenly with catastrophic results. The process is simultaneously destructive and creative in nature. Fact 73. Volcanic eruptions have permanently changed the colour of sunsets witnessed worldwide. After truly massive eruptions blast material high into the atmosphere, the sky itself becomes like a canvas for strange and fiery colours. Volcanic ash combined with sulfur particles scatters sunlight in unusual ways, creating sunsets and sunrises that glow with intense reds, deep purples, and brilliant oranges unlike anything seen during normal times. In the 19th century, the catastrophic eruption of Krakatoa filled skies across the entire globe, with vivid displays that inspired painters, poets, and writers. Some art historians believe that the famous painting called The Scream by Edvard Munch may have captured the blood-red skies that lingered after volcanic eruptions. In the 1990s, Mount Pinatubo's massive eruption dimmed sunlight worldwide and created unusually brilliant sunsets that lasted for several years. These spectacular displays remind us that volcanoes are not only destructive forces, they are also artists painting across the sky itself, fundamentally altering the quality of light that bathes the entire Earth. Fact 74. fire whirls can leap across roads and rivers, spreading destruction unpredictably. In the absolute chaos of a major wildfire, walls of flame sometimes give rise to spinning vortices of pure fire called fire whirls. These terrifying twisters of flame form when extreme heat combines with wind to spin columns of air upward, drawing burning debris skyward. Unlike ordinary tornadoes made of air, these vortices actively feed on fire itself, carrying glowing embers and sparks high into the sky. Eyewitnesses and firefighters have reported watching fire whirls leap across supposedly protective barriers like roads, highways, and even rivers, igniting completely new blazes far beyond the original fire line. In some documented cases, fire whirls can rise hundreds of feet into the air and behave like fiery bridges, effectively connecting one burning region to another across gaps. Their unpredictable movements make them especially dangerous because they spread fire with explosive speed in directions that are almost impossible to predict. To stand before one is to witness the terrifying marriage of wind and flame, a stark reminder that in nature, fire is not bound or contained by barriers we consider protective. Even wide rivers cannot stop a fire when it begins to spin and take flight through the air. Fact 75. Tsunamis can carry enormous ships deep inland, leaving them stranded far from water. The immense power of a tsunami wave is perhaps best illustrated by the surreal images it leaves behind after the water finally recedes. Massive ships weighing thousands of tons can be found resting in streets, open fields, or perched on top of buildings located miles from the shore. During the devastating Tohoku tsunami in Japan in 2011, fishing boats, cargo freighters, and even large vessels were lifted from their harbours and carried miles inland by the unstoppable force of water, eventually being deposited on rooftops or wedged tightly among houses. The sheer mass of these ships, with some weighing thousands of tons, matters very little to the momentum and energy of a tsunami wave. The waves act not like ordinary water, but as moving walls of ocean itself, lifting whatever they encounter and sweeping it along effortlessly. For survivors returning to examine the damage, the sight of massive ships stranded in neighbourhoods far from water is deeply surreal and unforgettable. These displaced giants serve as haunting physical reminders that when the sea decides to move with purpose, it can carry even the heaviest creations of humankind wherever it wishes, leaving them behind as strange monuments to the ocean's unstoppable strength. Fact 76. Tornadoes can lift cows and other livestock, carrying them miles away through the air. Tornadoes have gained an infamous reputation for their ability to fling debris vast distances, but historical accounts and eyewitness reports tell of something even stranger and more disturbing: entire farm animals being lifted and carried away. Farmers have watched in absolute shock and horror as tornado funnels plucked cows, horses, or sheep directly from pastures, spinning them upward like weightless objects caught in an invisible hand. In some documented cases, the animals have been discovered miles away from where they were taken, alive but deeply shaken and traumatized. More often, tragically, they are lost completely amid the scattered debris and wreckage. The mechanics behind this are simple, but absolutely devastating in practice. Tornado winds, which often exceed 200 miles per hour at their peak, create dramatic pressure drops that can lift and hurl virtually anything in their path, regardless of size or weight. While stories of airborne cows are sometimes exaggerated or treated as folklore, enough reliable reports exist from credible witnesses to confirm their genuine possibility. These bizarre events highlight the completely surreal nature of tornadoes, where the ordinary order of life gets overturned completely, and even creatures weighing hundreds of pounds can be whisked suddenly into the sky as if gravity itself had been momentarily suspended. Fact 77. Avalanches can snap centuries-old trees like fragile toothpicks. When a massive avalanche races down a mountainside with tremendous force, it carries far more than just snow and ice. Entire ancient forests can be consumed and destroyed by the roaring flow in seconds. Trees that have stood strong for centuries, weathering countless storms and harsh winters, get snapped and uprooted as though they were nothing more than fragile twigs or matchsticks. Survivors who return to examine slopes after major avalanches describe seeing complete wastelands, with bare scars of exposed rock where dense forests once stood tall and proud. The combined mass of snow, ice, and debris exerts crushing pressure that is simply impossible for even the strongest and thickest trees to withstand. Avalanches can flatten entire acres of mature forest in just minutes, leaving behind only tangled piles of broken trunks and scattered branches. The destruction becomes so complete and thorough that new growth and vegetation may take many decades or even centuries to fully return and recover. Fact 78. Some earthquakes make the ground open wide enough to swallow entire buildings. When the earth shifts with extreme violence during major earthquakes, it sometimes tears open fissures and cracks that are wide enough to literally engulf entire structures. In parts of Mexico, Turkey, and China, historical earthquakes have opened massive rifts in the ground that consumed houses, barns, vehicles, and even entire sections of paved roads. These frightening chasms get created when the crust pulls apart suddenly under enormous stress, leaving gaps that collapse inward. For survivors who witness this happening, the sight becomes absolutely terrifying and nightmarish. The comfortable illusion of solid, stable ground vanishes instantly as the earth itself splits open like a mouth. Though not quite as common as general shaking and structural collapse, these deep fissures highlight the unpredictability of major seismic events. They can appear suddenly without warning, stretching for miles across the landscape and reshaping entire regions. In moments, buildings that once seemed immovable and permanent simply vanish into the earth, swallowed completely by the planet's shifting plates. Such terrifying sights leave lasting scars not only on physical landscapes, but also deeply on the memory and psychology of those who witnessed the ground literally opening up beneath their feet. Fact 79. Hurricanes can toss cars through the air like children's toys. In the most violent and powerful hurricanes, winds reach speeds that are strong enough to lift heavy vehicles completely off the ground and hurl them through the air. Video footage captured during storms along the Gulf Coast and throughout the Caribbean shows cars tumbling end over end, carried by powerful gusts that exceed 150 miles per hour. These extreme winds generate significant pressure differences that effectively reduce the grip of tires on pavement, making even vehicles weighing thousands of pounds vulnerable to being lifted. Once they become airborne, cars transform into dangerous projectiles, colliding violently with buildings and critical infrastructure. Emergency responders and officials strongly warn residents never to rely on vehicles for protection during major hurricanes, as they can be swept away easily by both wind and rising floodwaters. Fact 80. The largest landslide ever recorded moved more earth than many entire mountains contain. In May of 1970, the steep flank of Mount Huascarán in Peru collapsed catastrophically after a massive earthquake struck the region. In just seconds, an absolutely staggering mass of rock, ice, and debris thundered violently down the mountain, burying multiple entire towns in its path. The landslide travelled at terrifying speeds, carrying more earth and material than many mountains actually contain in their total volume. Entire villages were completely erased from existence, and tens of thousands of precious lives were lost in moments. Scientists who studied the catastrophic event carefully estimated that the volume of material moved was so immense it could have filled vast valleys multiple times over. Unlike slow, gradual erosion that patiently carves mountains over millions of years, this single landslide reshaped the entire landscape in an instant. Today, satellite images clearly reveal the massive scar left behind, serving as a permanent reminder of the moment when an entire mountain fell. It remains one of the largest landslides in all of recorded history, a dramatic example of how even the seemingly immovable peaks of Earth can suddenly crumble and flow like water under exactly the right conditions. Fact 81. Earthquakes can actually be triggered by the melting of massive glaciers. The enormous weight of glaciers presses down heavily on the Earth's crust beneath them, effectively holding geological faults in place through sheer pressure. When glaciers begin to melt, whether from natural climate cycles or modern climate change, that immense weight gradually gets lifted. The crust, suddenly freed from its icy burden, begins to slowly rebound upward. Sometimes that gradual rebound triggers earthquakes as the stressed rock adjusts. In regions like Greenland and Alaska, Scientists have recorded earthquakes that are directly linked to the retreat and melting of glaciers. Fact 82. A volcano in the Pacific once created a temporary island that later vanished again. In 2015, an undersea volcanic eruption in the remote Pacific Ocean gave rise to a completely new island near the island nation of Tonga. For many months, curious observers around the world watched as steam, ash, and lava steadily piled up until actual land emerged visibly from the sea. The island quickly became home to seabirds and was even colonized by hardy plants whose seeds had been blown in on the wind. But only a few short years later, relentless waves and coastal erosion gradually reclaimed the island, washing the volcanic creation back beneath the waves. Illy decides whether it will endure for ages or disappear back into the deep. Fact 83. Some tsunamis remain invisible until they finally reach the shore. In the open ocean, far from any coastline, a tsunami wave may be nearly impossible to detect or notice. Unlike storm waves, which have short crests and are easily visible, tsunami waves have enormous wavelengths that sometimes stretch hundreds of miles across the ocean. At sea and deep water, the wave height may only be a few feet tall, passing almost completely unnoticed beneath ships. But when that same wave reaches shallow water near a shoreline, all of its energy gets forced upward dramatically, transforming into a towering wall of destruction. This deceptive nature makes tsunamis particularly dangerous and difficult to escape. Many hours may pass between the triggering earthquake happening deep underwater and the actual arrival of the wave at distant coasts. Fact 84. Tornadoes can be nearly invisible until they pick up dust or debris from the ground. When most people picture tornadoes in their imagination, they see dark funnels twisting dramatically across the sky. But some tornadoes are nearly invisible to the human eye, made only of swirling, rotating air. They cannot be seen at all until they begin gathering dust, dirt, or moisture from their surroundings. These clear air tornadoes are especially dangerous because their destructive winds may already be present without any visible warning signs. Pilots flying aircraft have reported encountering airborne funnels that were only detectable by the violent turbulence they created. Farmers have witnessed tornadoes crossing open fields completely unseen until they suddenly struck a barn or scattered debris. In particularly dry regions, invisible tornadoes can pass silently across the landscape, revealed only by the sudden destruction they leave in their wake. These ghostly whirlwinds remind us clearly that tornadoes are not defined by their appearance, but by their motion and rotation. Whether wrapped in thick dust or hidden in clear skies, they remain the atmosphere unleashed in a spiral of pure destruction. Sometimes they are seen only in the damage and devastation they leave behind. Fact 85. Hurricanes can permanently reshape entire coastlines in a single storm. The combined force of hurricane winds, massive waves, and storm surge can fundamentally alter coastlines in ways that last for generations. Barrier islands get cut completely in half, sandy beaches vanish overnight, and new water inlets appear where none existed before the storm. In 2005, Hurricane Katrina carved brand new channels through Louisiana's fragile wetlands, erasing entire stretches of land overnight. In 2012, Hurricane Sandy pushed seawater deep into New Jersey and New York, altering shorelines for years to come. These dramatic changes happen because hurricanes concentrate absolutely enormous energy into a brief time span, battering landforms that normally shift very gradually over centuries. Entire detailed maps can become outdated and useless after a single powerful storm passes through. What was once a familiar stretch of beach visited by families may be completely gone forever, replaced by marshes, new channels, or open sea. Hurricanes are not merely weather events that pass and then everything returns to normal. They are genuine geological forces actively rewriting coastlines in ways that permanently shape communities, fragile ecosystems, and human memory for generations. Fact 86. Earthquakes can reverse the flow of underground springs. Beneath the surface where we cannot see, water flows constantly through complex networks of channels and porous rock formations, eventually forming springs that bubble up naturally into rivers and streams. Earthquakes can violently disturb these delicate hidden pathways, compressing some regions while expanding others. In rare but documented cases, this has caused underground springs to completely reverse their flow direction, sending water back down into the earth instead of flowing out. Fact 87. volcanic ash clouds can block out sunlight for many months. When a volcano erupts with truly exceptional force, the ash cloud can rise high into the stratosphere, far beyond the reach of rain that might otherwise wash it away relatively quickly. Once volcanic material reaches those extreme altitudes, fine ash particles and sulfur dioxide gas can linger and drift for many months, significantly dimming sunlight across entire continents. The massive eruption of Mount Pinatubo in 1991 reduced global temperatures measurably by nearly a full degree for several years, thanks to the persistent veil of particles floating high above. In earlier centuries, eruptions like Tambora darkened skies worldwide, with sunsets glowing red for many months afterward. These long-lasting clouds prove both beautiful and dangerous simultaneously. They cool the climate noticeably, disrupt normal agriculture, and alter established weather patterns. Yet they also create otherworldly skies that remind us of Earth's fragility. The sight of dimmed sunlight filtering through volcanic haze serves as a haunting reminder that even the brightest star in our sky can be temporarily muted when Earth decides to release its ash into the atmosphere. Fact 88. Firestorms can create winds stronger than hurricanes. When entire cities or vast forests burn intensely enough, the rising heat can generate its own powerful wind system. These are called firestorms, which are blazes so vast and hot that they actively pull in air from all directions, creating gale-force winds specifically to feed themselves. In Dresden during World War II, firestorms created winds exceeding 100 miles per hour, literally sucking people and debris into the flames. In wildland areas, similar events have been recorded with forests consumed by blazes that roar like hurricanes. The physics behind this is simple yet absolutely terrifying. Heat rises rapidly, pressure drops dramatically, and surrounding air rushes inward violently to fill the void. The result becomes a storm made entirely of fire, with winds and flames working together in deadly unison. Unlike hurricanes, which eventually dissipate naturally over land, firestorms end only when all available fuel is completely gone. They show us how fire, once it grows large enough, ceases to be a simple event and becomes its own atmospheric system of destruction. Fact 89. Tsunamis can be triggered by submarine landslides beneath the ocean. Not all tsunamis are caused by earthquakes shaking the seafloor. Sometimes truly massive landslides occur deep beneath the sea, displacing vast volumes of water and setting off waves that rival those from tectonic shifts. These submarine landslides may happen when thick sediments piled along continental shelves suddenly collapse and tumble downward. Scientists studying ancient underwater deposits have found clear evidence of landslide-triggered tsunamis that were hundreds of feet tall, reaching distant coastlines with devastating force. Unlike earthquake tsunamis, which may provide some warning through seismic monitoring, these submarine landslides can strike with almost no advance notice because the collapse itself serves as the trigger. Fact 90. Tornadoes can lift asphalt pavement right off roads. The strongest tornadoes leave behind scars and damage that truly defy belief and comprehension. In some extreme cases, winds have been so incredibly intense that they literally peeled asphalt pavement from highways, leaving only bare dirt where paved roads once ran smoothly. This happens because tornado winds create extreme pressure differences combined with a battering force of debris striking the surface repeatedly. Asphalt, which seems immovable and permanent under ordinary circumstances, can be ripped apart violently and carried away in chunks. After the historic tri-state tornado of 1925, and more recently during Oklahoma storms, investigators documented roads stripped completely bare, as if giant invisible claws had raked across them. Such evidence demonstrates just how violent these funnels truly become at their absolute peak. Not only lifting houses and cars, but also tearing into the very ground that we build upon. A road designed and built to endure decades of heavy traffic stands absolutely no chance against the atmospheric violence of a tornado operating at full strength. Fact 91. Earthquakes can be felt on the opposite side of the planet. When a truly massive earthquake shakes one part of Earth, the energy does not stop at the epicenter or even nearby regions. Instead, powerful seismic waves radiate outward in all directions, traveling through the crust, mantle, and even the core. Sensitive instruments called seismographs routinely pick up these vibrations on the far side of the world, thousands of miles away. After the 9.1 magnitude earthquake off Sumatra in 2004, seismographs from California to Africa recorded the planet trembling and shaking. To people living in those distant locations, these faraway ripples are often too faint to notice or feel. But occasionally, if the earthquake is enormous enough, subtle motions may be felt halfway around the world. It is as though Earth itself becomes a bell, and the quake serves as the hammer strike, sending deep tones and vibrations that resonate around the entire globe. These distant quakes remind us that the world beneath our feet is truly interconnected as one. One violent slip along a fault somewhere can send shudders through the entire sphere we call home. Fact 92. Hurricanes can carry salt spray many miles inland. The tremendous force of hurricane winds does not only move rain and debris, it also lifts seawater itself into the air, creating salty spray that can travel far inland from the coast. When hurricanes make landfall, this invisible mist can be carried for dozens of miles, coating trees, crops and buildings in layers of salt crystals. Farmers have returned after storms to find their fields burned brown, not by fire but by salt clinging to every leaf. In some documented cases, freshwater lakes and rivers have been contaminated with seawater, dramatically altering ecosystems for months or even years. Fact 93. Some volcanoes erupt with glowing rivers flowing beneath ice. In rare places where glaciers crown volcanic peaks, eruptions create absolutely surreal spectacles. Glowing rivers of molten lava flow beneath or directly through solid ice. When fire meets ice in this way, explosive interactions occur instantly. The lava melts vast amounts of glacial ice in mere moments, sending massive floods of scalding water surging down valleys. In Iceland, eruptions occurring beneath thick glaciers have produced catastrophic glacial outburst floods, known locally as Jökulhlaups, which are capable of sweeping away bridges and reshaping entire landscapes overnight. At the same time, molten rock continues to glow red-hot, carving tunnels and channels beneath sheets of white ice. Steam rises in immense columns as two of nature's fiercest opposites collide. To stand near such an eruption is to see contradictions made real. Rivers that glow with fire yet flow beneath frozen layers. Landscapes that tremble with both flame and frost simultaneously. These rare eruptions prove that Earth's extremes do not cancel each other out. Instead, they merge to create wonders unlike anything else in nature. Fact 94. Earthquakes can shatter glass windows hundreds of miles away from the epicenter. Even very far from the epicenter, an earthquake's waves can travel through the ground with enough energy to rattle and even shatter windows. During the Great Alaska Earthquake of 1964, glass panes cracked and fell out of buildings in Seattle, which was more than 1,000 miles away. Vibrations from large earthquakes arrive in distinct pulses, some fast and sharp, others long and slowly rolling. These waves can cause tall buildings and windows to sway in resonance, amplifying their motion until glass suddenly snaps. For residents living far from the earthquake source, the shock can be deeply unnerving. To feel only a mild shake yet see windows burst or hear glass shatter suddenly. These distant effects illustrate how powerful seismic waves truly are, crossing continents and oceans with little loss of strength. Earthquakes remind us that Earth is not solid and still. Instead, it is flexible, echoing vibrations outward like ripples spreading through a cosmic drum. Fact 95. The strongest tornadoes can level entire towns completely. While smaller tornadoes may damage roofs or scatter debris, the strongest tornadoes, classified as EF5 on the enhanced Fujita scale, possess the power to obliterate entire communities. In these rare but absolutely catastrophic storms, winds exceeding 200 miles per hour can strip houses down to their bare foundations, topple schools, and scatter neighborhoods into fields of unrecognizable rubble. The Joplin tornado of 2011 and the Tri-State tornado of 1925 left towns completely unrecognizable, reducing once busy streets to bare earth. Fact 96. Tsunamis can travel at the speed of passenger jets. In the deep ocean, tsunamis race forward with truly astonishing speed, reaching up to 500 or even 600 miles per hour, which is as fast as a commercial airliner cruising at altitude. Out at sea, their waves are barely noticeable, sometimes only a few feet high. Ships may sail directly over them without ever realizing what has passed beneath their hulls. Yet the energy inside these waves is absolutely immense, spread throughout the full depth of the ocean. When the tsunami finally reaches shallow water near coastlines, all of that energy gets forced upward, transforming an almost invisible swell into a towering wall of destruction. What began as a near-silent ripple in the middle of the sea becomes a catastrophe at shorelines hundreds or thousands of miles away. The sheer speed of tsunamis makes them nearly impossible to outrun, even for aircraft. They're oceanic shock waves, powerful reminders that water in motion can rival the pace of machines built for the skies. Fact 97. Volcanic eruptions have created entire mountain ranges. Mountains are usually thought of as ancient and immovable, but many of the world's most dramatic ranges were actually born from volcanic fire. The Andes stretching down South America were built largely by countless eruptions over millions of years. Each eruption piled new layers of lava and ash on top of the last, building peaks that now soar thousands of feet into the sky. Fact 98. Hurricanes can be visible from space as swirling giants. When astronauts look down from orbit, hurricanes rank among the most breathtaking and intimidating sights. From space, they appear as massive white spirals stretching hundreds of miles across, slowly turning over the ocean. At the center lies the eye, a dark circle of eerie calm, surrounded by towering walls of cloud that rise like cliffs. The view is both beautiful and deeply humbling. Fact 99. Earthquakes can turn forests into swamps overnight. In some regions, powerful earthquakes liquefy the ground, mixing soil and water until the land behaves like quicksand. Entire forests rooted in solid earth can suddenly sink, with trees becoming half submerged as the ground beneath them turns liquid. After the earthquake in Chile in 2010, large tracts of forested land became marshes overnight, with tree trunks jutting out from shallow lakes. This happens because seismic shaking forces groundwater upward, loosening soil until it loses its strength. For ecosystems, the change proves profound. Dry woodland becomes wetland, with new species moving in even as old ones perish. To walk through such a place is unsettling. The ground feels soft and unstable. The air becomes damp where it once was dry. Earthquakes remind us that landscapes are not fixed. In moments they can transform, trading forest for swamp, dry land for water, stability for fluidity. Fact 100. The biggest wildfires can create smoke plumes that reach the stratosphere. Most smoke rises only into the lower atmosphere, but the largest wildfires, burning with extreme intensity, can loft their plumes into the stratosphere, higher than where commercial jets fly. These colossal columns, sometimes called pyrocumulus towers, can stretch miles into the sky, visible from hundreds of miles away. In recent years, megafires in Australia and North America have injected smoke so high that it circled the globe, dimming sunlight on distant continents. Unlike ordinary smoke, which dissipates quickly, stratospheric plumes can linger for months, affecting weather and cooling the climate slightly. Satellites capture them as hazy streaks across the planet, fingerprints of fire visible from orbit. For those on the ground, the sight is apocalyptic. The sky turning orange or black, daylight fading beneath a smoke-filled sun. Wildfires are not only local disasters. At their largest, they are planetary events reshaping skies for the entire world.